Good morning, class. This is Rupali Memani, Assistant Professor, Arihant College of Arts, Commerce and Science, Camp, Pune. Now, in the last lectures, we have seen software engineering and the process model. So, proceeding further, in today's lecture, we will see a different process model. So, in today's lecture, we will see what is generic process model, then what are the prospective process models. We will also see the waterfall model and the incremental process model. So to begin with, what is generic process model? A generic process model is nothing but a graphical representation of the process or the model which you are going to make for the client or the user. So we try to represent it graphically, how the implementation is going to be, how the code is going to be written, how should be the interface, and how the testing is going to be done. So it is a representation made graphically. The generic process framework for the software engineering defines the following framework activities. We have seen in the last lectures the umbrella activities. So in similar way, you have some framework activities here with which you are going to represent it graphically by the generic process model. So what are the activities? They are communication. So how is the communication going to be between the user interface, the front end and the back end? How is the planning going to be? And what are the modeling techniques which I am going to use, and then we see what is the construction or how do I construct the model. Then lastly we see the deployment of the model. In this model we also see other activities which can be defined with the framework, which include how is the tracking and control going to be for the model. Then what are the risk management? So what are the risk features which I will be facing during the execution or deployment of the model? I try to manage the risk factors. I am going to check the quality at various levels. So it will be a quality assurance. Then we will also be seeing the technical reviews which are to be considered. So in this model, we will see the analysis of the relevant strategy, what strategy I am going to make for this particular model. We try to mark the specification for the particular requirements. We meet with the client and take the requirements of the client. We work on the specifications which are given to us by the client. We make a rough draft of the requirements given to us. Then we select a relevant perspective. So we try to get a rough judgment of how exactly the model is going to be. We try to create a perspective model of the relevant information given to us by the user, and we have a rough draft with us. So selection of the relevant perspective in the sense, we selection of the perspective of the frameworks. The evaluation should be based on what basis we are going to evaluate the project, we are going to work on the model, what are the frameworks for the evaluation. Then we define the project managers, the IT controllers, software developers, system analyst and the consultant. So we try to create a team around it who are going to work on our model. Then we try to study the rationale for each perspective and evaluate its relevance. So what should be different perspective of each individual model or each individual personnel we are going to include in the model. We try to evaluate the relevant effect to that. We evaluate the available competence for the perspective. We evaluate the effort required for each perspective. So each and every minute detail of the model with respect to the personnel is evaluated at various stages, and then we try to select the best option for our project model, and we try to make a selection of the relevant perspective. We also give the explanation of the selection, the comments or relevance of the perspectives or assignment of people to selected perspective. Then a rough structure is maintained wherein we try to give some explanation if we have to give to the respective models who are working on that, the team which will be working on the models, the coding, the designing. So each and every detail is given to that particular selected, and a work is assigned and delegated to the personnel. Once we have selected with the relevant perspective, then we proceed with the evaluation from the selected perspective. So what have you gone through this? What has been actually done up till now? We try to evaluate it on the selections we have done. Whether we are right in our selection, whether we have to redo the selection, whether some selection has to be modified. All these evaluations are done based on the selections. Then once it is done, then we try to balance of the perspective. So if everything is in position, if the proper workload is given to the proper delegated person, if the proper evaluation of the available competencies is done, is the effort required manipulated, we try to balance all the perspective. So this is nothing but your generic process model. So proceeding further, we come to the next process model, that is prescriptive process model. So what is prescriptive process model? It is an abstract representation of the software process or a model. So specifically it is used to bring order and project consistency in the software project. So we try to create a perspective on how actually the model, whether it is going in order, what should be the consistency in the model, whether it is going on proper time bound, whether individual persons are doing their individual roles and work. So it is called as a perspective. Now why it is called as? Because such model prescribe a set of process elements or the framework activities, the software engineering actions, the tasks given to the managers, the work products, the quality assurance, whether it is maintaining the quality, whether it is up to the mark of the customer, whether it is to the client based model which was initially given to us by the client, whether we are working on the requirements and the changes, control mechanism of for each product. We also check in for the risk factors, we also check in whether it is going on a proper track, whether the control mechanism is working on this. So we are trying to prescribe a different process for each and every stages with respect to the personals, with respect to the projects, with respect to the model. So this is called as a prescriptive process model. So proceeding further, we come to the different models which are given to us by software engineer. So one basic model which is given to us is the waterfall model. Now what exactly is a waterfall model? It is called a linear sequential model or a classical life cycle model. So in this, a linear sequence is given for the model, that is after one phase the second phase will go and so on. The similar way a waterfalls from the height, it follows, if I have a waterfall standing in a steps or ladder, it will go on to the topmost ladder, from there it will go to the second last and so on till it comes to the end of the ladder. So this way it is one by one sequentially model which is defined. Now in this model each phase is fully completed before beginning of the next phase. So unless and until it completes one phase, it is not able to go to the next phase. So it has to complete one phase and then it goes to the next phase, the next phase is completed and so on. Now this model is used for small projects. So suppose my model is divided into smaller projects. So let's say I am proceeding with unit, a simple project wherein after one process I am wrapping something, wrapping a box. So only after wrapping it will go on to the labeling part, only after labeling it will go on to the main box. So in this, unless and until one phase is complete, the second phase is not able to be achieved. So in this model, feedback is taken at each and every phase to ensure that the project is in the right way. So here, because we have divided the model in different phases, we try to take the feedbacks of each and every phase. If the feedback is proper, we come to know that we are going on the right track, whether the proper control measures are taken, whether the quality is maintained and so on. So testing part start only after the deployment is complete. And once the deployment is there, then we try to do the software testing. So the waterfall model is a sequential approach where each fundamental activity or a process represented as a separate phase and is arranged in a sequential or a linear order. Now in the waterfall model, we must first plan and schedule all the activities before starting working. So here the entire project or the model has to be ready in hand before we start with actual execution or starting with the code of the model. So it is a plan driven process because the plan is ready. It is a process. Now what is a plan driven process? It is a process where all the activities are planned first and the progress is measured against the plan. So while the agile process planning is incremental and it's easier to change the process to reflect the requirement changes. But in the waterfall model, what happens? You have to predefine the plan and you have to go according to the plan. Now what are the phases of the waterfall model? The phases are, first is a requirement. You need to take requirements from the client. Then we go on to the design. How is the design of the model going to be? Then the implementation, how the actual model is going to implement. Then we go on to the testing, whether it is requirement or perfect with the client, whatever is the requirement. So we do the alpha testing and the beta testing, and then finally the maintenance. So whether we give a 1 year maintenance contract to the client, that if anything occurs in that particular one year, we try to rework on the model. So these are the different phases of the waterfall model. So here we have seen the generic process, the communication, planning, modeling, construction and deployment, how the waterfall model will going to work. In the communication, we is basically communication communicating with the client, gathering the requirement from him. In the planning, we try to give him the estimate, what should be the estimate, the budget, what should be the schedule time, whether this project will go on for so many months, 6 to 8 months or so. Then we track after every month whether it is going on a proper track of at this month, what activities are going on. Then is the modeling. So we try to analyze and design the model. Then is the actual construction part, wherein we are going to write the coding, and we give a tester or software tester who checks actually if the coding is in a proper place. And once everything is done, we come to the deployment phase, wherein we deliver project to the client. The client checks in for the any requirements or whether it is up to the requirements. Then any support given to the client, if anything he needs, we give the support to that, and we take a proper feedback from the client. This is your waterfall model. Now, what are the advantages of model? It is simple and easy to understand and implement and use. It is very simple. The client understand what actually the model. All the requirements are known at the beginning, hence it is easy to manage. It avoids overlapping of phases because each phase is completed before we start with the new phase. The model works for small projects because the requirement are understood very well. The model is preferred for those projects where the quality is more important compared to the cost of the project, because the phase is completed and checked at each and every phase and the feedback is taken. Now, there are also some disadvantages of this waterfall model. Now, this model is not good for complex and object oriented projects. It is a poor model for long projects, and the model program problems with the model are uncovered until the software testing, and the amount of risk is high. So then, continuing with the models, next is the incremental process model. Now, what is the incremental process model? The incremental model combines the elements of the waterfall model and they are applied in an iterative fashion. Iterative fashion in the sense, after every increment we try to check the models and then try to go into the next step. The first increment in this model is generally a core product. So after you get one product, then you go on iterating till you get a proper final product of that. Now, each increment builds the product and submits it to the customer for any suggested modification. So one product is given to the customer. Okay, this is one user interface, one part of the project I have done. We give it to the customer checks on it and gives us suggestions or if there are any modifications to be done. The next increment implements on the customer's suggestions and add additional requirements in the previous increment. If the customers give some suggestion, the product is again got back and worked on that, and whatever requirements are given by the client or the customer and whatever are his suggestions are added to the previous model which is done, and so we are incrementing that model. The process is repeated until the product is finished. For example, the word processing software is developed using the incremental model, and the process goes on repeating till a final project which is on the customer satisfaction is made. The word processing software is developed based on this incremental model. Now, these are the incremental model. We have tried to represent it graphically. We get the outline description, concurrent activities, we take the specification, we develop, and then we try to validate. So if any problem with the validation, we go on to the development again, and again we go on to the specification. So after each and every model is done, we try to share it with the customer. So we have a judgment. So we try to cover the disadvantages which are given in the waterfall model. That is only at the end we are coming to know that the customer is not satisfied. So here at each and every level we try to get a feedback and we can work on it and we can increment our product. So specification, what is the initial version? If there are some changes, it again goes to the specification. After development, what are the intermediate versions? If there are any changes, again it comes to the development. And after validation, what is the final version? So this goes on in a repeated fashion and it goes on incrementing your final product. Then we will see what are the disadvantages of incremental. The cost of final product may cross the cost estimated initially. Now, because we are continuously incrementing after every point of time, the customer comes up with the new requirements and new suggestions, and then maybe the cost which we have already given to the client might increase. The model requires a very clear and a complete planning. The planning of design is required before the whole system is broken into small increments. The demands of the customer for additional functionalities after every event increase causes problem during the system architecture. Then we see what are the advantages of the incremental model. This model is flexible because the cost of development is low and the initial product delivery is faster. It is easy to test and debug during smaller iterations. The working software generates quickly and early during the software life cycle, and the customers can respond to its functionalities after every increment. So at every stage I have the satisfaction or the feedback of the customer. I can test the software and debug it in smaller iterations, and it is more flexible because the cost is very low initially and the final delivery is faster. So in today's lecture, we have seen what is a generic process model. We also saw the prescriptive process model. We saw in detail the waterfall model and also the incremental process model. So that's all for today's lecture. So see you again in a new topic with some new models. For this lecture, I have taken references from all these sites. So see you in the next lecture. Till then, thank you.